Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Grace Thompson moved through the traffic like a shadow, her swollen feet scraping against the hot asphalt as the Lego sun pressed down mercilessly. The cooler of water on her head felt heavier than ever, her neck stiff, her back screaming in protest. Every few steps, she paused to steady herself, whispering prices to drivers who barely looked her way. Her pregnancy was far along, too far for this kind of labor, but hunger was louder than fear. She had once imagined a gentler life. Before illness took her husband and debt swallowed their savings, Grace had dreamed of welcoming her child into warmth and safety. Instead, she found herself on the streets, bargaining with fate bottle by bottle. People saw her belly, but rarely her humanity. Survival had stripped her pride, leaving only determination. A sharp pain suddenly ripped through her abdomen, forcing her to gasp. Her vision blurred as she staggered, instinctively reaching for support. Her palm landed against the sleek body of a parked luxury car, cool metal against her burning skin, and she leaned there, breathing hard, praying the pain would pass. The car door flung open violently. Vanessa Cole stepped out, dressed in elegance and irritation, her eyes flashing with instant contempt. She stared at Grace as though she were dirt smeared across something sacred. The sight of a poor, pregnant hawker touching her car ignited her temper instantly. "Remove yourself from my car." Vanessa snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut. Grace turned, already apologizing, but the words never fully left her mouth. Vanessa's hand struck her face with brutal force, the slap echoing loudly. Pain exploded across Grace's cheek as she stumbled backward, stunned and confused. People nearby froze, unsure whether to intervene. Vanessa, fueled by rage, grabbed Grace's arm and dragged her across the pavement. Bottles spilled, rolling into the road, bursting under passing tires. Grace cried out, clutching her stomach, terror overtaking her strength. The trauma was too much. A sudden warmth rushed between Grace's legs, followed by unbearable pain that stole her breath. Her water had broken. She collapsed onto the ground, screaming, hands trembling as she held her belly. Panic swallowed her whole as contractions surged violently. Vanessa recoiled in disgust, not concern. Her lips curled as she stepped back, muttering insults under her breath. Without offering help or looking back, she returned to her car, slammed the door, and sped away, leaving Grace writhing on the ground. What Vanessa never noticed was a man standing across the street, frozen in horror. Daniel Cole had witnessed everything: the slap, the cruelty, the abandonment. The woman he was meant to marry suddenly looked monstrous. Daniel ran toward Grace, kneeling beside her despite his expensive suit. He spoke gently, trying to calm her while signaling for help. His hands shook, not from fear, but from rage and disbelief. Around them, murmurs grew as people gathered, shocked by what they had seen. A car was flagged down, and Daniel helped lift Grace inside, holding her hand as she cried through every contraction. He gave instructions quickly, firmly, his authority unquestioned. The drive to the hospital felt endless, every scream tightening something painful inside his chest. At the hospital, Daniel handled everything: payments, forms, doctors, never leaving the corridor. When the cry of a newborn finally pierced the air hours later, relief crashed over him like a wave. Grace lay exhausted but alive, tears streaming as she held her baby boy for the first time. The pain, the fear, the humiliation, it all faded in that moment. When she learned Daniel had stayed and paid for everything, she wept harder, overwhelmed by gratitude. She named her son Daniel, her voice trembling as she said it. The gesture struck him deeply, leaving him speechless. He nodded, swallowing emotion he hadn't expected to feel. Daniel ensured Grace lacked nothing. He visited daily, bringing food, supplies, and quiet reassurance. He never made her feel small. Slowly, trust replaced fear. After her discharge, Daniel rented a small apartment for Grace and furnished it modestly. He explained it as temporary help, careful not to wound her pride. Though hesitant, Grace accepted, knowing her child needed stability. For the first time since her husband's death, Grace slept on a bed, not concrete. She stared at the ceiling at night, holding her son, whispering promises of a better future. Meanwhile, Vanessa noticed Daniel's distance. His absences fed her suspicions, and jealousy twisted into obsession. Vanessa followed Daniel one afternoon and found the apartment. The sight of Grace and the baby ignited her fury. Convinced of betrayal, she stormed inside without warning. She screamed accusations, hurling insults and threats. Grace tried to explain, shaking as she held her child, but Vanessa would not listen. She began throwing Grace's belongings into the street, neighbors watching in stunned silence. Grace was forced out once again, standing helplessly with her baby amid scattered possessions. Shame crushed her spirit as tears streamed down her face. With nowhere else to go, Grace sought refuge at a nearby church. She collapsed onto a pew, clutching her child, sobbing until her body ached. The quiet space absorbed her pain, offering the only comfort she had left. That evening, Daniel discovered the truth. His confrontation with Vanessa was swift and final. He ended the engagement without hesitation, denouncing her cruelty and ordering her out of his life. Vanessa was left stunned, her wealth useless against the consequences of her actions. Daniel searched tirelessly until he found Grace at the church. Relief flooded her face when she saw him. He knelt before her, apologizing for everything she had endured to protect her dignity. He offered her a job as a maid in his home. Reluctantly, she agreed, determined to work honestly. As Grace stepped into Daniel's mansion, neither of them realized their lives had already crossed a point of no return. Grace's first days in Daniel's mansion were filled with quiet tension and careful restraint. The house was enormous, polished marble floors reflecting chandeliers that looked like frozen light, and every corner reminded her that she did not belong to this world. She woke before dawn each day, determined to work harder than anyone expected, cleaning, cooking, and tending to her baby with disciplined humility. The staff watched her with curiosity, some with kindness, others with thinly veiled judgment. But Grace kept her head low and her focus steady. Daniel observed her from a distance at first. He noticed how she never complained, how she thanked everyone no matter how small the gesture, and how she balanced exhaustion with unwavering gentleness toward her son. There was no trace of bitterness in her, only quiet strength. This unsettled him more than anger would have. He had grown up among wealth and entitlement, and Grace's dignity exposed the emptiness of that world. At night, when the mansion fell silent, Daniel found himself thinking about the woman who had once been dragged across a pavement and abandoned. The image haunted him. He began to realize that his concern for Grace was no longer rooted in guilt or responsibility, but in something deeper and more dangerous. Grace slowly began to settle into a routine. The mansion no longer felt terrifying, only unfamiliar. She learned which doors to avoid, which rooms required extra care, and how to move without drawing attention. Her son grew healthier by the day, his laughter filling the small room she had been given, bringing warmth into the cold luxury of the house. Daniel started speaking to her more often, asking about her day, her child, her hopes. At first, Grace answered cautiously, afraid of crossing invisible boundaries. But his tone was always respectful, never demanding. Over time, her guard softened. She spoke of her late husband, her dreams of owning a small bakery, and her fear of raising a child in a world that showed so little mercy. These conversations changed Daniel. He began to question the values he had inherited, the arrogance he had once ignored. Grace did not ask for pity, and that made her presence powerful. Without realizing it, he was falling in love. The Harrington family soon noticed a change in Daniel. His mother, Margaret Harrington, paid an unannounced visit to mansion, her sharp eyes scanning everything with practiced authority. She noticed Grace almost immediately, standing quietly with her baby. One look was enough to ignite disapproval. Margaret confronted Daniel privately, her voice laced with controlled outrage. She accused him of embarrassment, of lowering the family standards, of inviting gossip. To her, Grace was a reminder of everything the family believed they were above. Daniel stood his ground for the first time in his life. He spoke calmly but firmly, defending Grace's character and condemning the hypocrisy of judging someone by their poverty. The argument ended without resolution, but the lines were drawn. Words spread quickly among relatives. Whispers turned into confrontations, and confrontations into threats. Daniel was warned about inheritance, reputation, and legacy. Grace, sensing the tension, offered to leave, unwilling to be the reason Daniel suffered. Daniel refused. He told her plainly that her presence was not a burden, but a choice he was proud of. Those words shook Grace deeply. No one had ever chosen her so boldly. For the first time since her husband's death, Grace allowed herself to imagine happiness. The thought terrified her as much as it comforted her. Daniel eventually confessed his feelings. He did not rush or pressure her, but spoke honestly, admitting that he had fallen in love with her strength, her kindness, and her resilience. Grace was overwhelmed. Fear rose quickly, fueled by memories of loss and betrayal. She asked for time, and Daniel gave it willingly. Days passed, then weeks, and their bond only grew stronger. Love crept in quietly, without drama, rooted in trust and shared pain. When Grace finally said yes, it felt less like a beginning and more like a homecoming. The announcement of their relationship caused an uproar. Margaret Harrington openly opposed the union, calling it foolish and disgraceful. Daniel responded with decision that shocked everyone. He stepped away from the family business temporarily, choosing independence over control. This act changed everything. The family saw that Daniel's love was not a phase but a conviction. Slowly, resistance weakened. Grace remained respectful, never responding to insults with anger, which only highlighted her grace. Margaret watched silently as her son thrived without family pressure, and doubt crept into her certainty. The wedding was simple but elegant. Grace wore a modest gown, her smile radiant with hard-earned peace. Daniel stood beside her, unwavering. The ceremony was filled with emotion, not spectacle, and when vows were exchanged, even the harshest critics felt the weight of their sincerity. Margaret attended quietly, observing Grace's humility and devotion. When Grace thanked her for coming, without bitterness or expectation, something in the older woman finally softened. Acceptance did not come immediately, but the door was no longer closed. Daniel helped Grace pursue her dream of owning a bakery. What began as a small shop quickly grew, driven by Grace's dedication and skill. Her pastries became known across the city, her business expanding beyond expectations. Grace worked tirelessly, not to prove herself, but because she loved what she built. Daniel supported without overshadowing her, proud to stand beside her rather than above her. The woman once humiliated on the street had become a respected entrepreneur. Grace later gave birth to twin boys, filling the mansion with laughter and chaos. Margaret held the babies one afternoon, tears slipping silently down her face. In that moment, all resistance dissolved. She embraced Grace fully, apologizing for her cruelty and blindness. Grace forgave her without hesitation. Years later, Grace stood at the head of a thriving business empire. Her past no longer a source of shame but strength. She remained grounded, compassionate, and generous, never forgetting where she came from. Daniel watched her with pride, knowing love had reshaped them both. The street that once broke her had only prepared her. Grace's story became a testament to resilience, proving that a cruel moment could never define a worthy destiny. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.